Welcome back, class. We're now going to move into wrapping lines over these planes to create a sense of form. In our last class, we talked a lot about the breaking down our forms, thinking about them in terms of angles, coming up with what we call plane breaks. Plane breaks, as you found, are very crucial. Artists don't just draw lines at outer edges. They draw lines where two surfaces meet. Very crucial for the head and the rib cage, as you're finding out. So in our last class, we talked a lot about how to do that in a boxy way, as well as how to do that with a lot of curvilinear shapes. And a lot of times in the figure, you're going to deal with both of those together. So if anybody's familiar with Bridgman's drawings, you're going to notice, or if you've drawn the figure before, the upper part of your thigh is very curved. The lower part of it, as it gets to the tendons near the knee, it gets to be very boxy. And so actually you're going to be alternating the curves and the angles. I presented just one or the other, but in the drawing we'll start to alternate them as well. Today is what we're going to do is taking off from where you left last week. Last week I gave you another site to look at, one by Ron Lemon. He's an illustrator, animator, and you did the spiraling gestures. Those spiraling gestures were important. I hope all of you enjoyed doing them. He's incredibly good at them and got familiar with the curve of those lines over forms. I'm going to be showing you today modeled line drawings, and so there's a few ways to do these. Last week I showed you cross contour, the line that's crossing over the form, and Ron showed you the spiraling gestures, which is just a whole lot more of them, and doing them very rapid as a gesture. And what I'm going to show you today is going to get you to think of those spiraling gestures like you now already have done, as well as you're going to be able to cross over those lines. So basically on a form is what happens. I already drew this figure out so we could save some time of me drawing it out while all of you are standing here and looking at the tape. But as what I'm going to do is into this figure I just laid out, I'm going to put these modeling lines. So basically lines can move in the direction of a form. Okay, so they go in the axis line of the form, and you'll see me put them in that way, so whatever the axis line of the arm is, or rib cage. But as Ron Lemon showed you, you can also do them transverse to the form. That's going in the opposite direction, a 90-degree angle to it. So I haven't had you do both directions yet, but we're about to do it now. And these types of drawings, which I'm going to show you in the handout that I've given you. So this handout on it, at the top of it, should look like this. It's going to say assignment number 6, and it's going to talk about our date now, September 22nd. And I'm going to show you these couple of things that we've already conquered and about to do. This one that I'm showing you here isn't unlike what Ron Lemon was showing you. This one's done by a computer, and it's done just going transverse to the surface, so you can see the lines curving over the forms. When a line makes a turn, that's a plane break. We can draw a line in the axis line in terms of the high points of the forms and where they're going to make their most abrupt turns, which I'm going to show you today. So that's kind of what you've already done. This, if you look at this one in your handout, is what it's going to show you is the surface planes that you've already done and should be familiar with, but I'm just kind of going back. This is the two types of techniques, of course, just going back again and showing them to you. This one's very angular, but now we've got planes within them, with the lines turning over the angular planes and where the high points are. And now we've got the curvilinear one doing the same thing, our cross sections above and below the knee and so forth, which you should be familiar with now. They should be very old to you. And is where this can go, it can be like this. This is actually a runoff from an old book called The Natural Way to Draw. Some of you might have seen it. If not, look it up online. It's a great old drawing book. This particular one, is done very rapid, and you can do them like this. The one I'm about to show you is going to be a little more controlled than this, but some of them that you want to do could be like a ball of yarn. Now, the idea to these gestures, this kind of model line drawing that I'm about to show you, is going to have to do with form, meaning the center of everything, like on this, the center of all your forms are going to remain the lightest, meaning there's going to be less lines drawn. So if you look at this figure, all the center areas, more white showing through as something goes back in space and further back in space. They build the lines and they get darker and darker. So again, this is very scribbly and loose, and you can do them this way, or the one I'm about to show you, they can be done this way as well, and you can switch and go back and forth on these next assignments between them. So with that in mind, the drawing that I put up there, like yours, should be leave in the guidelines. I'm leaving in the guidelines of where the wrist is in relation to the foot, and this fell about this at this point. I put in, like all of you should be doing, I took from the pit of the neck and drew a vertical line. As you can see it, my vertical line gave me a lot of information. The knee hit at that point, and the edge of the foot was close to it. That vertical line is your original plumb line, as I've talked so much about. After that, which I forgot to mention, but on torsos, we think of them as a T-torso. So this is the pit of the neck. This is a vertical line. If indeed the shape is going like this, in this case, I've got it this way with a strong angle this way. So that's your next consideration. What is the angle of the shoulders off of this vertical line? That's where you want to begin. Once I had that, of course, I began to construct the block form of the upper part of the body. You can still see my construction lines. I left them in there. Here's the front of the cube, and this was the angle of the cube, the back of the cube. So all of that stuff is still left in there. I'm just going over this for some of you, maybe in figure drawing 1, that are still getting familiar with these forms. Trying to feel out the turn of the pelvis. If you look carefully, I'll just darken it. I kind of turned it. So there's an angle here. This would be the back view. If I cut through the figure, it would look like that. There's a slight tilt, not much. So anyways, everything is laid out in that sense, in a very general sense. These legs were laid out where the line just went right through, and then I added this and added this. This one was done much the same. It came through, these lines came through, and then I crossed them over. So anyways, with that in mind, is what we're going to do is begin to put some model lines on this thing. So the feeling of the arm and the way that I've got it, so if I did the cross section would be here, cutting that arm off against the block form that's underneath. Now if I begin to think of lines, how would they roll over this? This would have to begin to curve in this fashion and roll around, and this is going in deeper. These lines on the arm are curving this way. You would find where is the high point, which would be somewhere about there. Why is that important? It's going to give us the direction of how far this is going to curve around to here so that we can get kind of a feel of those directions. I am going to darken the points that turn back. So I'm going to curve these a little bit more. So at this point that's the closest to us can remain the lightest. This would have a plane break, I would say, about there. So this is going to make its curve around this. I have an original cylinder in here, or an ellipse. So now I can kind of wrap my lines to try to get a sense for how this would go. And so like you did in that tape, you're doing very much the same. Now I can cross them over. This is where it becomes different. Here it goes under, so I'm going to build them and get them a little darker. In the middle, I'm going to use less of them. So that's the idea. You're going to cross this over. The top of the hand, I left the plane break in here for the hand. This might turn at a little different angle like that. And then the side of the hand, it would drop and become darker. So again, keep wrapping lines. The pectoral muscle, you can still see the curve of the rib cage that I placed underneath. That's what this is. The block was put in first. So now I got a little sense of the curves. This is going this way. So now these curves would feel them wrap into the middle to where the sternum would be. The bone would be there, be a little lower, and this would start to make its curve. These would curve around if the arm wasn't there, so I'd have to kind of get a sense for how they're going to roll and curve. This is coming back and getting darker. The stomach muscles are going to wrap. Center line is where I've got it, so these are going back, wrapping around, darker on this side to turn that in. If something's moving further away, we can get it a little darker. Be careful, however, where two forms meet, where this arm meets up against the pectoral muscle. One of these edges has got to be darker. I'm keeping the arm darker. I can use a series of lines in here to curve it back. They just cannot be as dark. Otherwise, it's all going to run together, as you would know. Up in here, this is the, as we talked about in the last class, this is the shoulder girdle up in here. The plane breaks are there. I'm going to keep it kind of plane orientated, so I'm going to turn this a little bit this way. The feel of the neck would curve in through here. This would come up, and the muscle is going to come around. So I've got to be careful here. This is going back. So I'm going to push it back just a little further. These curves would follow suit with this, as well as crossing over in this direction. Getting these a little darker. On the arm here, this would start to move in this direction. So as soon as my line picks up, there'd be a bicep muscle in here, of course. There'd be a top plane. And these would start to wrap and roll like this. Underneath here, this would be the bicep muscle. This is coming through to the tricep muscle underneath. So this is rolling and turning. So I'd have to think of the top, the side, the underplane, top, side, underplane. So keep wrapping the lines like you were doing with the exercise prior to this one. Watch your top planes of the muscle here. I'll put in a little curve, darken it a little bit. So watch if this is a muscle coming out. There might be a curve to it like this as this rolls in. This has to feel like it curves around. It's meeting the forearm. It's doing this. And then this one, I would have it in this sense. So now this is going to begin to curve this way. Watch your lines. Watch if there's a plane break. Watch where the plane break might be as far as how the curve is going to pick up this particular side of the wrist, and this becoming the front. So again, keep working with them, work with them. Now cross them over, go in the direction of the form, build it. At a joint, just connect the curves. So these curves are going this way. If it was a cylinder and I cut through it, would be that way. This one, if I draw through it, would be that way. And that's a key to what direction they go. And when they get to in the middle of an arm bending, then they just begin to turn like that, like a fan shape. This would become a little darker because it's moving in. This is the closest point to me, so I'll keep that my lightest. This on top here, there'd be a little bit of a fullness to this form, like this. That would go back, so that would start to pull it out. I'm going to cut this in a little more. I just stood in front of it a little for a moment to see what it was doing. This leg here this would be a plane break for the knee. This would be another plane break. This is my patella coming over. It would be a break like this to this. So those are surface planes. And so this would feel like it would cut around and deep, cut around and deep underneath. So watch, I got a line drawn there, a line drawn there, in order to figure out where these particular things are going to be. And so, again, feel the top surface. There'd be a little bit of a top surface like this. It would cut way under. This would get a little straighter. This arm is going to be sitting on the top of that. This is going to come around. Angle for the knee going this way. I'm going to darken it just a little bit. These would start to take on a curve that way. The lower part of the cylinder of the leg, if I drew it through, which at the beginning, when you're laying these things out, you should. It would look like that. It'll give you an idea of how to wrap your lines. There's a muscle in here. This muscle in here is sometimes what you do is just draw the shape of it, draw the high point of it, and then try to get the sense of how this line would wrap over that particular form. There's the tibia bone in here, so it's going to move in, and the curve would wrap around. It would go back in space here, wrap this way. So I'm going to join these. This is going to hook up. Keep again, the points that are the closest to us. I'm going to use lines, but I'm going to keep them less. So develop the others. I'm going to kind of curve this a little more rapidly. This would become a little darker underneath. So anyways, as you start to see these lines in there, that's going to really enhance your form. And again, this technique is a wonderful one. It's used all the time. I use it in laying out paintings, of course, drawings. Eventually, all these different things are going to come together, and we'll be using them, alternating them. This is what I'm going to do is take a little of this stomach under the arm. I have to kind of get a sense for it because the arm's in front. It would angle back this way. This would come around. This angle is going to move this way. There's a plane break there. You can be fussy with them. I could take it around the oblique muscle in the stomach and feel those edges. This is going back further. Rib cage going back further. Edge of my arm is here. I'm just going to make it real dark. You go around these things with a line. Make the line bold and strong in the end result in certain places that you want to bring out. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of it now. Let those lines be bold. Let them be. I want to pull this out a little closer than that. What you do with that contour line is going to be very important. The rib cage is now, this was the curve of my ellipse. The oblique muscle is going to come out of that. So watch the change of direction that takes place in there. And just take your time, with those contours when you go around this particular drawing that you're about to do. The stomach is going to be in here. This will take a little bit of a curve. These fingers would have a curve to them. I'm just going to loosely do it. There's top planes and so forth. There'd be a side plane there. I know this is going to be little. I tried to do this drawing real big so that you can see some of these smaller details. The edge of the leg, which I'm going to make with a darker line just so that you can see it real clearly in the midst of all these others. I'm going to come around. I use a lot of straight lines when I draw the figure. That's what's underneath. I'm going to come around with a few curves. Anyways, this leg that's in front of us, it comes out with a very strong plane on top like this that the hand's sitting up against. I'm going to darken it this way. It's going to wrap around. It's going to cut way in. It's a very deep undercut here. And the one in the middle, of course, that has a curve to it, but I want to keep it lighter. I'm going to use some lines going this way, but keep them very, very light, okay? So use lines on the areas where the light is, or in our case, the way we're developing this is the points of the form that are the closest to us, This is closest to us, further away, those would be developed and they would get a little darker. I'm going to go with a little darker line in here, just a little darker line in here, and a little bit in here, just so that you can see that just a little better. Develop these, you're going to have a lot of lines on them. The knee in the front, this angle, there's a curve to it, but it would follow in this direction. This goes back, build it darker, okay? The lower leg, there's a muscle here. I'm going to clarify it just a little more than what I originally had. It would be in there like that. And watch your lines as they fall. Lines of muscles move into bones. This bone is very graceful. out of this. This line flows in at a wonderful little curve like that. The tibia bone is here, would come to this this is the tip, coming into the ankle. So then is what we do is we watch the muscle back there. It would have a curve to it. This would roll in and around. Oops, probably a little too dramatic. And I'll try to get out of your way. But sometimes to get lines, as you know, you have to stand in front of it. So what I've got to do is get this curve of the calf back a little more than what I've got it. So I'm going to curve that like that and then wrap this around the bone. There we go. I think that's better. It's hard to draw these things standing off to the side. Anyways, this is going to get darker. That moves in, and then these have to kind of transition together. Okay, so I'm going to strengthen this a little bit so that you can see the edge a little more, and we'll build into it, get a little darker. You can spend, obviously, take your time when you're doing these. I'm going to develop this a little further, but this could be done with a soft pencil. Probably work out better than the charcoal. Charcoal is real soft and it smears a lot, so it's a little harder to develop, but because of the video, it's a little easier for you to see bold, so I'm doing it this way. This foot now, this curve of the cylinder as it goes down, it would curve up a fair amount. It would do this. Now the top of the foot, I did put a plane break in it here a little bit earlier, which means on the foot there's always a high point at the talus bone, and then it's going to wrap and fall over that point. It's going to wrap over that point. And this is going to move this way, and I'm just going to do this with it and come around with it, okay? So you're watching that high point because you're trying to get a sense of form to that foot at this stage, and this would become darker. These would start to radiate out a little bit and become a little darker, and then it gives us a little bit of depth. So on here we get a little bit of the tibia bone, and with that tibia bone would be a little bit of an edge turning radically back and around, and these legs have a lot of curve to them. Cylinder would increasingly go up a little bit as it would roll down, of course. This crossover, like we've been doing over, develop the curves of this muscle, get in there, wrap your lines, curve them around and under. I'd rather see on these drawings too much depth, too much curve than not enough. Keep building them. And when it gets to the top of the foot, there would be a point here where there'd be a top plane. It would roll around and you'd get the ankle in here. Somewhat like that. This would come through, and then there'd be a little bit of a top of a foot, not much from this angle, but a little bit, okay? I'm just going to keep it kind of simple here. There'd be a little bit of form here in the back too, but I'm going to have a hard time achieving it, so I'm just going to leave it like that. This is the plane break. So top plane. What I'm going to do is add a few more lines. This point is close to me, so I'm going to leave it as is. This point, we could develop it a little further, push it back. These lines, I could use a few of them in there going in this direction as my cylinder. This is going to pull out a little bit, as you see, wraps around, and then the curve of the hip. Watch the lines and how they might curve. There's transitions between this piece and that piece, so you want to watch how they might be. This point, I'm going to keep a little lighter just so that it remains visible. Let's see, a few more lines, and then I'm going to stop on this. I'm going to darken this top part just a little more. I'm going to keep the middle part and just a little bit lighter, not much. The top of this head, I've got a plane up here because we're looking down at this character a bit, the way that he's tilted. So there'd be a top plane to it. and it can move off in this direction. Front of the forehead, this could curve back and become darker. This could curve back and become darker. So you're trying to pull out the center as much as you can. I'd have to get a sense for this angle and how this might turn. Front of the face, just falling as, again, the strong curve to the head. Matter of fact, in our next class, we're going to be talking more about heads and their relationship to the upper body. The eyebrows now down, follow that line across, you get to the top of the ear. Ears would make a real nice triangle. This one, of course, would be in through here. There would be a top plane on this ear, and there would be a little edge going this way, and then that way it would do that. There's a bridge to the nose. It's close to me, so that would be in light, and so there'd be a wedge here on the side. This nose is going way back this way because we're looking down on it. Okay, so I'm not going to do much more to the head. I'm just going to darken a few points and keep the front ones with some lines and just keep them light. And so I could develop this a little more and get it darker and darker and send it back so that this area increasingly pulls out because of the light. Okay, so again, darker areas going back, other areas keeping them light. Watch your curves. Under the pectoral muscle, it would get a little darker under here. Just darken it a very little bit. At that angle, that would be, nipple would be here, this one would be over here. Okay. Last thing I'm going to do, if you got anything of a person sitting on something, use it. Use the lines, keep them bold, keep them more spacious as they get into the light, and then begin to curve them. The curves of your lines, again, where two forms meet, like where the leg meets what he's sitting on, keep one of these edges, of course, darker. I've got the leg darker, so I remain and keep that darker. Where you hook these to it, make sure they're a little lighter. You're going to run into the areas on the figure you're doing, and however they're either seated on something or whatever, and you want to keep one of the edges stronger than the other. I would have to do the same for the bottom of this leg. I would have to keep these lines definitely darker. Always keep them lines, not a value mass, but the charcoal is very difficult, so it starts to turn into a value mass. Anyways, with that, I'm going to leave it, and so work with both of these ways. This way is a little more controlled. The other one in the handout is very loose and rapid. Try that as well. Have fun with it. Until next time, happy drawing.